So this is the next lecture, and this is on cell respiration. So I just talked about ATP, and basically cell respiration takes ADP plus that inorganic P and puts it back together to make ATP, and it does that in the mitochondria. So this is going to get, we're going to look at pathways and things here. So this is what you're going to be able to look at. I'll let you look at that. Here's key vocabulary. Basically, the mitochondria is the main organelle that makes ATP. So it's the energy powerhouse of the cell and things like that you all know. So mitochondria basically is responsible for making ATP. And it was brought in through endosymbiosis. So it actually has its own DNA. It has its own ribosomes. So it is actually sort of functions on its own. It reproduces by binary fission. So it actually acts like a prokaryote. Okay, so respiration is different than breathing. So we're talking about cellular respiration. Cellular respiration is the process by which cell breaks down glucose to produce ATP and heat and carbon dioxide as a byproduct. ATP is used to power many processes in the cell, like active transport requires energy, building of molecules requires energy, movement, bioluminescence. Here is showing this anglerfish that has this light. So it shines this light, like if you think of Dory, that fish had that light real deep in the water, and other metabolic reactions. So ATP is kind of like the energy currency of your cell. So breathing, by contrast, is the inhalation and exhalation of air into and out of the lungs. Breathing is more accurately referred to as ventilation, right? So you breathe in oxygen, it goes into your lungs, and your lungs have lots and lots of surface area. And that oxygen is going to get into your red blood cells, and your red blood cells are going to carry it to your muscle cells, and then your muscle then actually the mitochondria is going to use that oxygen to make ATP, and then a byproduct of making ATP is CO2. So that CO2 is going to go back into your bloodstream. It's going to go back to your lungs, and you're going to breathe out that CO2. But this part up here is breathing, and this part up here is cellular respiration. So basically, it takes glucose plus oxygen, and it's going to release CO2, water, and you're going to make 38 ATP. So we'll look at this equation again, but this is the equation for cellular respiration. So this is the big bang right here is 38 ATP. For one molecule of glucose, it makes 38 ATP. All right. Okay, so I think I just said that. I think I just said all that. Okay, I think I said all that. But again, your alveoli here, is a lot of surface area. So your lungs have tons and tons of surface area, which is good. So you can take in lots of oxygen, and you can release lots of CO2. Okay, so the purpose of cellular respiration is to release the chemical energy, which is stored in food molecules. And the food source may be glucose, and this is the main thing that we're going to look at. But I'm going to show you these other ones just for fun. And the other one is amino acids. So, like you can break down your proteins for amino acids, but it's not particularly a good energy source. And lipid molecules are an excellent energy source. And you need oxygen, and you breathe that oxygen in. And I'm just going to show you this here. So this is glycolysis, right? And this is the main one we're going to look at today. This is the one that you're going to sort of have to know. But this is glucose, right? So carbohydrate is a glucose, and it's going to go through glycolysis here. Then it's going to go through the link. Then it's going to go through the citrus-actic cycle. Then it's going to go to the electron transport chain. And that electron transport chain is what's going to form all of this. So that's like the normal, that's generally what you burn. That's what we're going to study, this pathway here. But you can also get energy from fats and lipids, but they don't actually go through that same pathway. They go through a different pathway. And some of those lipids are really big molecules. So they have to get cut apart. They have to, do all this processing here. But they actually skip this part here, glycolysis. Yeah, they skip the glycolysis part and they go actually right here to this link. And this is highly complicated, so this is overly simplified, but they feed right in here. You can also break down proteins, and they also skip this glycolysis process, and some of them actually skip this process. They go right to the citric acid cycle. But there's all kinds of, packaging and changing and all kinds of reactions that are going on here. This is urea cycle. This has to do with your pee and has a lot of nitrogen in it. Protein has a lot of nitrogen in it. So I just did want to show you that. I mean, I wouldn't expect you to know these, but just know that, fats and lipids are also broke down in the mitochondria to make ATP, and proteins or amino acids can also be broken down in the mitochondria to make ATP. So, right, so all of this part here is in the mitochondria. This is actually not in the mitochondria. So anyways, I just wanted to show you that. Okay, so the next thing we're going to talk about is photosynthesis. And they are, kind of opposite reactions, but they happen in different organelles, you know, um, but plants actually do both, right? So cellular respiration, you're going to take a glucose molecule, you're going to take oxygen, and you're going to make CO2 and water, right? So you breathe in oxygen, you breathe out CO2, you're going to make water, but the big payoff here is ATP. So if you look here, the products here are the reactants up here. This is photosynthesis. So photosynthesis is going to take CO2 and water, which is this right here. So the reactants here are the products here, and the reactants here are the products here. So it's kind of the opposite. So if you know one reaction, you should know the other. The biggest thing is this produces energy, and this requires energy. And the energy it requires actually you get from the light reaction. So you get, so photosynthesis is making something out of light. Photo means light, synthesis is make something. So here you're making a sugar out of light, water, and carbon dioxide, and it gives off oxygen. So these are related, and I'll show you. I think I'm going to show you this one here. So this is again a lot to look at, but the four things we're going to look at here is this would be glycolysis, this would be the link reaction here, this is the Krebs cycle, and this is the electron transport chain. So it's going to take in glucose, and it's going to take in oxygen, and oxygen is actually needed for the electron transport chain, and it's going to give off CO2. And it's going to make ATP. Where it says, oh, here it's going to make ATP right here. So that's what electron transport chain does. And then here's photosynthesis. So that's actually going to have two. This has 3 or 4 steps. This generally has 2 steps. So the light dependent reaction is going to take light, and that light is actually going to split that water, and it's going to make ATP and NAD, which I'll talk about later. But there, it's going to take the hydrogens off there, but it's going to give off oxygen. And the Calvin cycle actually is going to need this carbon to make the sugar, right? And that sugar is going to go up here and then get fed into that, right? So photosynthesis, the cellular respiration is going to give off water, and photosynthesis needs that. Photosynthesis is going to give off oxygen, and cellular respiration is going to need that in the electron transport chain. And it's going to give off CO2 in the Krebs cycle, and photosynthesis is going to need that for the Calvin cycle. But this is the energy that it's going to need, and this is the energy that this one makes. So anyways, this is a more detailed. Okay, so you're going to distinguish between respiration and breathing. Breathing brings air into and out of the lungs, while respiration breaks down food to release energy. Cellular respiration and photosynthesis. Photosynthesis traps sunlight energy and converts it to chemical energy or food, which is sugar or carbs or fats or oils, while respiration extracts energy from food to make ATP. Okay, so this is going to be I'm going to show you all this. So aerobic, if you're doing aerobic exercise, aerobic really means you need oxygen. That's what aerobic means. And anaerobic means without oxygen. And so first thing we're going to do aerobic, and anaerobic is just this out here, is just glycolysis. So I'll do that at the end. But the main we're going to show here is aerobic. And it's basically in 4 different steps. Here they call 3 main stages. Depends on what you call this reaction here. And this is showing you, I don't know how to get rid of that thing. I have to. Okay, so that at the bottom there, this glycolysis has 2 ATP. This makes 2 ATP. The electron transport chain, or chemiosmosis, is where you get your Big Bang. That's where you get that 34 ATP. And this is where oxygen is needed. So if you have oxygen, you can make a lot of ATP with sugar or other things. And I do just want to show you this. So these are these same 4. So this is glycolysis. This is that link reaction. This is the Krebs cycle. And this is the electron transport chain here. And so the glycolysis actually happens outside of the mitochondria. And then this happens on the inner membrane. And the Krebs cycle happens here in the inner matrix. And then the electron transport chain happens on the inner membrane. So remember, we talked about the mitochondria had a double membrane, and it got that the second membrane here from that endosymbiosis, or what is the name of that? How it got eaten by the endocytosis. So that's how this was actually a membrane off of the original cell when it got taken in. But it does have a double membrane, and that's important because actually it's going to create a gradient here of hydrogen, right? So you're going to have more hydrogen here than over there. So this is actually going to create a gradient here, which is going to require energy in the form of electrons in this case. Okay. So the first one is glycolysis, and this does happen outside of happen outside the mitochondria in the cytoplasm. And this is a glucose molecule. It has carbon, oxygen, and hydrogen, but this is just showing you the 6 carbons. And that is actually going to get broken down, and it's going to create 2 ATP. And it's actually going to create these, and it's going to get a phosphate group. Actually, it's going to cost 2 ATP. I'm sorry. So it's going to cost 2 ATP. And the phosphate on this ATP went here. The phosphate on this ATP went here. And now this is glyceraldehyde, 3-phosphate. You'll learn all this stuff if you take organic chemistry in school. This is all organic chemistry. And then some other things are going to happen. This NAD here is actually an electron acceptor. So NADH, the only difference between this molecule and this molecule is this molecule has 2 electrons. And this is going to get carried to the electron transport chain eventually. All right. And then it's also going to cost 2 ATP. And then eventually that, actually it's going to, I'm sorry, this phosphate is going to get attached back to this ATP. And then you're going to get 2 pyruvate molecules for one thing of glucose. And so the breakdown of glucose is going to make 2 pyruvate. It's going to make 2 ATP, and it's going to make 2 NADH, right? So it's going to do that. That's what it's going to do. I'm not sure why that is not 4. This should be 4, I think. I think this number here should be 4. Because 2 and 2 are 4. I think that number there should be 4. Okay. So I just show you that. So this is where that is right here, right? So we're still in glycolysis. We just made pyruvate. So that's this right here. This pyruvate is right here. So we made pyruvate and we made some NADH, and it shows you here that these are electron carriers. These are going to carry electrons. Oh. I know why that is 2. I know why this is 2. Okay. So it's 2 because there's 2 ATP here and there's 2 ATP here, but it actually costs you 2 ATP up here. So 4 minus, so here's 4 that you made and 2 that cost you. So 4 minus 2 is 2. I'm sorry. That's right. I knew that. All right. So far what we have done is this up here. So we have 2 pyruvate and we've made NADH and a little bit of ATP. Okay. So this is the link reaction, and here's the pyruvate that we just made. And this is actually going to lose I think I have this in the next one, actually. This actually occurs in the mitochondrial matrix. I thought I had a better picture of that. Maybe I don't. Okay. I think I do for the next one, though. Okay. So the pyruvate is going to lose a carbon. It's going to lose some electrons, but it's actually going to get this coenzyme A, which is this CoA right here, is going to get attached, which is a protein. It's going to get attached to these 2 carbons right here. So it lost a carbon. Now you have 2 carbons. These 2 carbons are right here. And this is technically a lipid. And this is going to give off ATP, and it's going to give off some fat. Okay. But it actually, but this pyruvate cannot actually be accepted into the Krebs cycle. It has to go through this packaging. Yeah, it links glycolysis with the Krebs cycle. So it's called the link reaction. You could call it different stuff. All right. Okay, so that's right. So that's what I just showed you, right? So it's going to, this pyruvate is going to lose a carbon, and now you have these 2 carbons down here. You're going to get this protein, which is a coenzyme A. So it's called acetyl-CoA. It's actually a lipid, but anyways. Okay, so that's this right here, right? So this is, they call it pyruvate oxidation there. You could call it the link reaction. But here's where you made that acetyl-CoA, and this does happen in the inner membrane. Or they call it the mitochondrial, what do they call it? They call it the mitochondrial matrix. Okay. All right. So that's acetyl-CoA. So now you are ready to go into the Krebs cycle. Or it's also called the citric acid cycle. And this also occurs in the matrix. And I'm going to show you this actually here. So this shows you that really you could just keep track of the carbons. So far we in glycolysis you make the pyruvate, and then the link reaction you made the acetyl-CoA. All right, and now it is going to pick up a water. It's going to lose this CoA, and this is citrate, and this is 6 carbons, right? So this has 6 carbons. Now it changed a little bit. Now it's isocitrate. Now it's going to start losing electrons, right? This NAD plus does not have electrons. This has 2 electrons. It's going to lose a carbon. Now it's a 5 carbon molecule. It's going to lose more electrons. It's going to lose another carbon, and it's actually going to make some ATP here. And 5 minus 4, now you have a 4 carbon. Now it's going to lose some more electrons. Fat is also an electron carrier. It's going to lose some more electrons, but it's still a 4 carbon. Now it's going to gain some water, and now it's malate, and now it's going to lose some more electrons, right? So all these electrons are coming off of them. These are high energy molecules. And now this is going to go back up here, and it's going to pick up those 2 again. So now it's going to go back to 6, right? And this has to go around twice for each molecule of for each glucose molecule. Okay. So this is a cycle, right? So, but for each cycle, you're making NAD, and you're making ATP, and you're making FAD, and here's NAD too, right? So that's what you're doing here. This is called the citric acid cycle here. You can also call it the Krebs cycle. I don't know why they call it different stuff. All right. So it does require 2 turns. So it's just bringing in. So it has to go around twice for each molecule of glucose. And basically what it's going to generate is 4 CO2. So here's a CO2 and here's a CO2, but it has to go around twice. So 2 times 2 is 4. It's made this ATP, but it has to go around twice. So it's going to make 2 ATP. It's going to make 6 NAD, and each of these contain 2 electrons, right? So there's 1 here, there's 1 here, there's 1 here. 3 times 2 is 6. And then you have 1 FAD. That's 2 times 1 is 2. And so that's what this is going to generate. These are electron carriers, which is going to be important when we get to the electron transport chain. Okay. This gets breathed out, right? So you're going to breathe this out. This is a waste product here. So you don't really want this. Well, not that you don't want it, you don't need it. Okay. Okay, so I just said all that. These are electron carriers. So each NAD and FAD both carry 2 electrons. And I'll show you where they're going to carry them to, but that's important. And up here it's a NAD too, right? Okay. So, and that's what this is showing you here, right? So the Krebs cycle, it gives off CO2, it makes 2 ATP, it makes FAD, and it makes NAD. All right, so that's what this is showing you right here. So that's what I just showed you. Okay, so the electron transport chain and chemiosmosis. So the electron transport chain is the final stage of cellular respiration. It occurs in the mitochondrial cristae, or the inner membrane. So that's where this is. And you can see here, this is where this NAD and FAD are going to come in. So this right is right here, right. So here's the FAD, that's going to get fed into here. Here's the NAD, that's going to get fed into here. This is the electron transport chain. Right? So we still have not made very much ATP. Okay, so okay. So the NAD is actually going to come in here. It's going to lose its electrons. And those electrons are higher energy. And when it loses those electrons, it's going to pump hydrogens across the membrane, right? And then it's going to have a carrier, and there's great animations for this. I might show one. And then there's a carrier that's going to carry that electron over to here. And then those electrons are going to get excited again. It's going to pump more hydrogens across the electron. And then you're going to have another carrier. It's going to carry this over here. And you're going to pump more electrons over there. But this is actually where you require oxygen, right? This is where the oxygen is required. And this is going to combine the electrons, the hydrogen, and the oxygen to make water. So this is kind of the final, this oxygen accepts these electrons and it combines with hydrogen to make water. So the oxygen is sort of the final electron acceptor. So that's NAD. Fat actually comes in here. So it skips this, these are all proteins. So these are embedded proteins in that membrane. You don't have to know the proteins. I mean, so fat is going to actually come in here, but this is also going to pump hydrogens. It's got electrons, and those electrons have energy, and it's going to pump those hydrogens across the membrane here and across the membrane here. And then oxygen is needed as this final electron acceptor. And then it's going to combine with hydrogens and it's going to make water. Okay. So those are cytochromes. Okay. So let me go back here a minute. So that's what this is right here, right? So this is going to show you the same thing. So those NADs that you created up here and here and here are now going to get fed into the electron transport chain. And here they're going to pump hydrogens across this outer membrane right here. And then this is the electron carrier. It's going to carry the electrons to the next protein, and that's going to pump hydrogens across that. This is an electron carrier. These are all proteins. But they get their energy from the electrons. The electrons have energy. And then that's going to carry it over here. Oxygen is the final electron acceptor. And then it's going to combine with two hydrogens, and it's going to make water. All right. But the whole purpose of the electron transport chain is to pump hydrogens across this membrane right here. Here's where FAD comes in. So FAD skips this one, but it's going to pump hydrogens here, and it's going to pump hydrogens here. So what you're doing is you're building a gradient. You're going to have lots of hydrogens out here with very little hydrogens in here. So that's the idea. Okay. So you're creating a gradient that you're going to be able to do work with, and that's what those electrons do. Okay. Okay, so yeah, the final, I don't know why I had it fixed stop that from doing that. Can't move it. I don't know how to do that. Okay, I don't know. I take pointer. All right, I'm not sure. All right. So the last part, so we still have not made very much ATP. All right. So chemiosmosis is the last part of it. And this is the process by which electron transport is used to make ATP. So the hydrogen ions or protons are pumped across the mitochondrial membrane from low concentration to high concentration. So it's moving it across it's active transport because it's moving it against the concentration gradient. And the energy that it uses to pump that is those electrons. All right. Okay, so once you have created that gradient, then the protons or the hydrogen ions or whatever, you could call these protons as well. They can flow back down their concentration gradient via an enzyme called ATP synthase. And this is a really cool, protein. Looks like, I'll show you it, but it looks like a little machine. And so now you have high concentration here, low concentration here, and they're automatically going to flow this way, right? And as it flows this way, this thing kind of ratchets and ratchets. And here's where you got your ATP plus PI. It's gonna use the energy of these hydrogens to actually attach that phosphate there, and you're gonna get ATP. So this is ATP synthase. I would know what this is, but this is the electron transport chain again, right? And this generates 34 ATP. So this is the big bang for your buck. This is where you get almost all your ATP. And I'll show you that here. So right here, so here is these hydrogens are getting pumped this way. So you have more hydrogens out here than in here. And those hydrogens want to flow that way. And the easiest way for them to flow back that way is through this ATP synthase right here. So they're going to flow here. And when they, this actually ratchets around, and it's going to actually, it doesn't show it here, but it's going to take ATP plus PI, and it's going to make 32 ATP. So that's cellular respiration. Okay, so glycolysis produces pyruvate in the cytoplasm. The transition reaction turns pyruvate into acetyl-CoA in the mitochondrial matrix. The Krebs cycle produces 4 CO2, 2 ATP, 6 NAD, and 2 FAD. And then NAD and FAD donate electrons to the electron transport chain, which generates ATP through chemiosmosis. So the chemiosmosis is this right here. This ATP synthase is chemiosmosis. So anyways, okay. All right. Okay, so now we're going to talk about anaerobic respiration. And so like I just showed you, this requires oxygen, right? So this electron transport chain requires oxygen. So if you don't have oxygen, you can't make this 32 ATP. And you really can't make this all of this sort of shuts down. So what you're really stuck with is what's out here. All right. So, so the cell, okay, yeah. So it can only run the Krebs cycle, the electron transport chain, if there's enough oxygen. So if oxygen is missing, then they're sort of forced to do this anaerobic respiration, which is just glycolysis. So this does not involve the mitochondria at all. It doesn't ever go into mitochondria. And they think actually this evolved first. And then when we got the mitochondria, then we got this huge influx of ATP. So it was really beneficial to us. Yeah, so aerobic respiration only uses glycolysis, and this only produces 2 ATP rather than 38, right? So this made 2 ATP, and this all down here, if you go through this cycle up here, if you go through this whole cycle here, it makes 38. So it's really better to do it with oxygen because you make a lot more ATP for each molecule of glucose. All right, so if there's no oxygen available, basically some bacteria and mammal muscles will make lactic acid, and yeast will actually make ethanol, right? So this is alcohol fermentation. This is how you make wine and beer and bread and things like that. So this is actually a very useful reaction. And so this one is, I think humans can only sprint for a certain amount of time. I can't remember how long or how far. And after that, you cannot exert that much energy because you run out of oxygen. And if you've ever tried to run too much and you start cramping, that's because you have run out of oxygen and now lactic acid is building up in your muscles. And so that's not good, basically. And I'll have you do a little exercise with that. But so anaerobic respiration is sometimes referred to as fermentation, and that's this right here. And oh yeah, they're both fermentation. Okay, they're both fermentation. This one produces alcohol. This one produces lactic acid. So anyway. Anyway, so that's that. So this is just going to go over a little bit of that. So anaerobic respiration only occurs in animals when oxygen is in short supply. Um, Muscles during vigorous or prolonged exercise. So here, the pyruvate forms lactic acid. A buildup of lactic acid in the cells causes muscle fatigue. And once oxygen becomes available again, lactic acid is converted back into pyruvic acid, is broken down into carbon dioxide and water. And that's the products of photosynthesis. So even if you stop running, you still are breathing hard, and you'll breathe hard for a while until you get enough oxygen, till your cells get enough oxygen, and it actually can go back to doing doing aerobic respiration. You really don't want to do anaerobic respiration. Okay, so this is in yeast and bacteria, anaerobic respiration is a way of life. In yeast, the pyruvic molecules formed from glycolysis are broken down into ethanol and carbon dioxide. This process is used to make drinks such as beer and wine and make dough rise. Small amounts of ATP are sufficient to meet the energy needs of these microorganisms. So this is an important um, reaction that is very useful, but it does not use oxygen. So, and it doesn't use the mitochondria. So yeast doesn't have I don't know if actually yeast doesn't have mitochondria. Okay. Okay, so respiration rate is usually measured by the amount of oxygen consumed or the amount of carbon dioxide produced in a given time. And then this one video, HHM video, they actually measure this. The rate of respiration is determined by factors such as temperature and energy demands of the individual. So increasing the temperature increases the rate of respiration up to an optimum temperature. As temperatures rise too high above the optimum temperature, the enzymes will control the reaction, denature the proteins, and can no longer catalyze this reaction. So a lot of times if you get a really high fever, what really is the big danger is that your proteins are going to denature, and it's those alpha helix and beta sheets. They're held together by hydrogen bonds, and those hydrogen bonds are fairly easy to break. So once your proteins sort of unfold, they no longer work properly, and so that's not a good thing. So it can lead to death. So people get pretty excited when your temperature gets too high. So in homeothermic organisms, they maintain a constant temperature, so that doesn't go over a certain temperature. So the respiration rate will increase to its maximum as the demand from the cells of the tissues increases, like the muscles in your legs when you're doing sprints. As the amount of oxygen needed and the amount of carbon dioxide produced increases, and your breathing rate will increase to compensate. So when you start running out of oxygen, that's when you start huffing and puffing, right? And you're trying to take in the oxygen, you're trying to get rid of the CO2. And if you can't keep up with your body's demands, you will go into anaerobic exercise, and you will, get lactic acid. That's when you'll build up lactic acid. All right. Okay, during intense and/or prolonged exercise, the body's oxygen intake cannot meet its oxygen deficit. At this point, the cells use a combination of aerobic and anaerobic respiration in order to break down glucose and generate ATP. But again, if you're doing anaerobic, you're only making 2 ATP. So you're not making very much ATP. You have to have oxygen to make that 38 ATP in the mitochondria. Okay, so that's what this says. So once exercise stops, heavy breathing often continues for a number of minutes after in order to repay the oxygen debt and remove the lactic acid that is built up. Okay, so I might have you do that little muscle exercise, I think. Okay, so compare the following aspects of aerobic and anaerobic respiration. This would be interesting. This would be good to know. Okay, so the reactants are glucose and oxygen. Anaerobic does not use oxygen. Um, the products are this produces carbon dioxide in water, and anaerobic produces lactic acid in animals and carbon dioxide, and it also produces ethanol in plants and yeast. So the energy yield in the if you go through the mitochondria and you have oxygen, that electron transport chain needs this oxygen up here. That's where you get the big payoff for ATP. So this makes ATP. If you don't have oxygen, the electron transport chain, the Krebs cycle is all shut down, and basically the whole mitochondria will shut down. So you're left with 2 ATP. So this is a much better use of a glucose molecule than this. If you burn glucose molecule in the mitochondria, you get 38 ATP. If you don't have oxygen, you're only getting 2 ATP for a glucose molecule. Molecule of glucose, I'm sorry. So I think that's it. So I will have some exercises and things that will hopefully make that clear. Um, so that's cellular respiration.